when I first started my very first day of seminary, we had like a retreat of all of the incoming students. So there were, I don't know, 40 or 50 of us at the time at the beginning. And we had this all-day retreat with all the faculty of the seminary to kind of get us aligned with. And I was really not at my best. I got to be honest, I was not at my best. I had just been recovering from hepatitis A, which we had got right after we moved to Ohio. And by the way, best weight loss program I've ever been on, hepatitis A. I don't recommend it though. Anyway, so as part of this, we had a part where we were asked to sort of divide up amongst ourselves based on which gospel was our favorite gospel. And I'll tell you right now that the most favorite is the Gospel of John. Everybody seems to love it. It's very poetic. Everybody loves the Gospel of John. Matthew and Luke also have a lot of fans. But I joined the group that their favorite book is the Gospel of Mark. And me and like 3 other people really love the Gospel. And I totally understand it, right? The Gospel of Mark, it's way shorter. In fact, scholars believe it was the first Gospel that was written, and Matthew and Luke use Mark's Gospel, and they have some extra material they add on to it to kind of flesh out the story a little bit. Mark's Gospel begins at the baptism. There's no birth narrative or whatever. And we just read a little bit from the very end of Mark's Gospel, although most scholars believe that that ending was added later, like in the 2nd century, about 100 years after Mark actually wrote his Gospel. And I don't know, we don't know a lot about Mark, but one thing we do know is he was not a good writer. His Greek is apparently really bad. I don't read Greek. But the way it's written, it's like he's not a scholar. Let's put it that way, right? Mark is kind of a pretty rough writer, and he writes this story about Jesus' gospel. And if you read it, the word that shows up more often than anything is immediately. And in Mark's gospel, Jesus is active and on the move, and when he does something, then he immediately goes and does the next thing. You would imagine by reading Mark that the whole thing happened in about 3 days, because Jesus is immediately going here and there, although it actually is like more than a year's worth of time. And what I've always said is that if the Gospels were like PBS documentaries, like the Gospel of John would be like a Ken Burns production. It's lush. It's got the beautiful music, the slow pan over the old pictures and images. It's a beautiful piece of work. Mark's Gospel was more like a 10-year-old kid with a Super 8 camera. It's just like Patrick over here. He would use an iPad, but we're old, so we know what a Super 8 is. Anyway, right? It's really rough around the edges, but to me, it's always been the gospel that gets like right at the heart of the story. I think the experience of Jesus, really comes across more clearly in Mark's gospel than in any of the others because of its sense of closeness and immediacy. So I love Mark's gospel for that reason, although it leaves a lot of what we think of as important stories aren't in Mark's gospel because he didn't have all the information. Still, to me, is extremely compelling. But I have another reason why I really love Mark's Gospel, because it's really important in my own journey of faith. As most of you know, I didn't grow up going to church. I wasn't particularly religious or anything. I was spiritual. And I started going on Christmas Eve. I've told that story lots of times, right? So Christmas Eve only for about 10 or 12 years. And then when I lived in Oregon at the time, and I met some people who were Christians in a way that I hadn't really experienced before, who were really seemed to be living out Jesus' example in a way that I wasn't really familiar with. I only knew like the hypocrite kind of Christians. These seemed like the more genuine kind of Christians. And so I started being sort of curious, like, well, maybe like I could like go to church or something. I don't know. So I was thinking about it, and I was reading a lot. I was reading a lot of books about the church and about Jesus and trying to figure out. And I read this book by a guy named Reynolds Price. He was an author. He was a novelist, but he was a devout Christian, and he had translated the Gospel of Mark himself. He'd written his own translation. He also did a translation of the Gospel of John, and then he wrote his own gospel, like based on his own knowledge of, of the Gospels and the stories. He wrote his own gospel. But I was reading this Gospel of Mark one day in my apartment in Portland, Oregon, and it was a cloudy day. Surprise, surprise. And I had this, I don't know what to call it really, an epiphany. I had this sense. If anybody used to be a Methodist, John Wesley, when he goes to this Bible meeting, when he gets sort of converted, he talks about how his heart was strangely warmed. And I would say that's a pretty apt description. That I felt something, some connection to something bigger than myself, to God as I would come to understand it. As I read this Gospel of Mark, and I had this sense that it spoke a truth, that something important was happening in this story and these words and in this movement that Jesus started, that Mark was telling me about. And so I've always really held on to what Mark's gospel had to say to me, because without it, my life would have been completely different. Then Mark's gospel was the entryway into a different kind of life, a life of faith that has led me in some strange directions, including being a priest in Camillus, New York. Nothing that would have not been on my radar 25, 30 years ago. I can tell you that right now. Not that I don't love it here, but like as someone who was a little disdainful of religion, to be a minister is still kind of confusing to me. And I've mentioned, I think my best friend in high school actually drove to West Virginia after I got ordained to see for herself, but she could not believe it that I was a minister. She's been here too, actually. But so Mark's gospel opened for me this new life that has been enriching and fulfilling and meaningful in a way that I would have not anticipated. And what really impresses me about this is that Mark himself is someone we know practically nothing about. He gets mentioned a couple of times in the book of Acts and Paul's letters. He seems to have been, an early member of the church, a leader amongst the church, someone who helped plant the faith, to share the faith in the world in which he lived. He traveled all over, and we don't know hardly anything about him. And yet his words continue to resonate with us down to this very day. And in fact, his words inspired Matthew and Luke to write their own gospels, to go out and find more information, to take this bare bones story that so captivated them that they needed to go find out more. So they went and they found people who knew Jesus, and they added on to the story. They fleshed out these bones that Mark had created. And so Mark not only continues to inspire us, he inspired other evangelists to find out more and to tell their stories. And we are all an inheritor of these gospels that these men created. That I like to imagine that, like me, they had some sort of experience of Jesus, of God, that changed their lives, and they just wanted to go out and to share that, to tell as many people as possible, and to use Mark's somewhat bad writing skills to do that. He was so inspired that he transcended his own limitations to share this gospel story. And that's an inspiration. It's an inspiration to me for sure, and I hope it can be an inspiration to all of you as well, because all of us have something that we can offer, some skill, some ability, some passion that we can bring to this life of faith, so that we can share it with others through the things we do, through the things we say, through the people we interact with. That in our lives we should be proclaiming the gospel. As St. Francis maybe said, as necessary, use words. That our very being should be an evangelism to the world. And in everything we do and the choices we make, that Jesus should be shining through. And like Mark and those other gospel writers who we also don't really know very much about, that the things we do can have an impact on people far beyond our understanding, far beyond our ability to know that things are happening, that the work that we do now will bear fruits that we may not see. Reynolds Price never met me. He doesn't know what his work did. I didn't write him a thank you letter or anything. He's passed away since. But Mark inspired him, and he inspired me. And so I've taken up this life of ministry, but all of us have a ministry to take up. It doesn't have to be ordained ministry. The ministry of the baptized is the real work of the church. You are the hands and the feet and the lips of God, of Jesus Christ in the world. That the only Jesus people know is the Jesus that you share with them. And so I hope that all of us can be inspired by this work of these early apostles and evangelists who, in their encounter with Jesus, had their lives changed. Because of that change, that they were inspired and impassioned and emboldened to share the good news. And there is such good news here. And the world needs good news. It needs you to share the good news. Amen.